Hello everyone, my name is Moira Ritchie and I'm from Portaferry, and I've been kindly asked today by Kat to do moderator for this panel based on local knowledge and local literacy and heritage and everything like that.
Just to introduce myself, I've spent my life in environmental education at all levels. Geography, especially landscape appreciation, biology, geology are always with me. However, none of that can be fully appreciated without a deep sense of heritage and origins. Strangford Lough and its surroundings are a really superb environment for me to observe, appreciate and share. I was chairman of Strangford Lough and Lecale Partnership in the early 2010s. Strangford Lough and Lecale Partnership is between Newrymoan and Down and Ards and North Down councils, with a range of local environmental and heritage NGOs, as well as community organisations. Its focus is management of the IOLN, so it's technically land-based, but it did creep onto the water. In 2012, to assist in our IOLN management plan, we came up with a list of what we felt were issues. And then we went out to the various communities around the area and asked if this list was what they thought. Or were there more issues? And one significant outcome of this consultation was that people felt that they had turned their backs on the Lough. Unless they were members of what were relatively expensive yacht clubs, few people actually enjoyed being on or around the water. And between 1981 and 86, the root and wheel races, rowing races between yacht clubs had been a feature of the Lough, but they had largely become untenable because of a lack of handicapping. There were more arguments than there were rowers. We in Strangford Lough and Lecale Partnership decided to reinstate the sport of recreational and competitive rowing in the Lough. Community-built St Iles skiffs had recently been developed in Scotland, and Strangford Lough and Lecale Partnership secured a grant from rural community funding and some money also from PSNI. And we offered the means of building the skiff to communities around the Lough. In the end, 9 skiffs were built and raced for the first time in Castleward Bay in 2014. Since then, most clubs have built second skiffs, run their own regattas, and competed in annual championships in the Lough, as well as triennial world championships as far away as Holland. Skiff rowing isn't just fun. Sport NI, about 5 years ago, did a study of the effect of coastal rowing based on the local clubs and found considerable health and well-being impacts that rowers would be extremely reluctant to abandon. It was a kind of, if we gave you a car on the condition that you never rowed again, would you take it? And nobody would. And in fact, I was speaking with a rower just last weekend who told me that despite his high-pressure job, his couple of years rowing had improved his health so much that he was almost totally off his high blood pressure meds. A result. This initiative also gets local people appreciating the wildlife and landscape, understanding weather and tides, and establishing communities. And maybe we could play the, it's just a promo video for Skiffy Fest. Thank you. As you're watching that, in addition, Strangford Lough and Lecale Partnership is heavily involved in projects such as eco-moorings to protect eelgrass from erosion by mooring chains. More eelgrass means more habitat for sand eels, which means more food for young terns, whose numbers are currently declining. Now, tern rafts are being installed to try and protect them from predation by otter, mink, and rats, but they need food. Historically, the Lough has built the oldest, it's been found at Grey Abbey, the oldest maritime logboat, about 3000 BC. And transatlantic sailing ships, as Bob mentioned, small punts, skiffs, sailing yachts like Draughtons, Witchcraft, Ruffians. There's a rich maritime heritage. The earliest ferry crossing in Ireland crossed the Narrows in 1160. Another grouping I'm involved in is the Strangford Lough Marine Protected Area Stakeholder Group. That's a bit of a mouthful, but you get the idea. This is a sounding board for around 60 environmental organisations, both governmental and non-governmental. It's a means of identifying gaps in the current knowledge or research, as well as sharing what's happening to avoid duplication, allow collaboration, and build on existing knowledge. It's also a useful means of trying to push government departments. It has 3 working groups: community engagement, invasive species, and research in blue carbon. Many of the constituent organisations have benefited from the recent round of Peace Plus. So it's exciting times when hopes and plans can be put into effect. Both of these local partnerships, and there's a lot of crossover between them, feel particularly important at this time when environmental issues are so challenging. And one of the things that I'd like to follow on with Bob's suggestion or Bob's comments in terms of local understanding of what's happening. We've all become aware of phenology when it applies to the earliest time that the beech trees are in leaf, or hawthorn blossom happens, and that is changing. That is being recorded. There's a lot of information about the phenology of the oceans and the Lough, but it's in fairly complex scientific papers, not accessible to citizen science. And one of the things I would like to challenge those who are doing that kind of science is, can we get it in a rather more accessible form so that we can make it a citizen science? I know it's difficult because it's all under that blue stuff out there, and your average punter doesn't see that. But if there's some way we can do that, I think that would be progress. Thank you.
And next then, we have James.
Good morning. My name's James Eliott. I'm chair of the Portaferry and Strangford Trust. Do we have some slides? Do you want to do it from behind the podium? Aye, okay. Right. Certainly what's gone before today actually renders a lot of what I'm about to say sort of additional, but the Portaferry and Strangford Trust was set up in 2013, and we were originally into the past, into the cultural and historical heritage. But as we've gone on through the years, it's been clear that you cannot look at that in isolation. You've got to think of it as going from the past through the present to the future, and that it's not all just about history. There's natural heritage, there's the geology, there's everything. And if you don't know how the historical events relate to that, then you are missing a trick. Now, I don't want to really go into a big long thing. That's our sort of mission statement, but really summed up what it is about getting people to turn around and look back at the sea again. When I was a child, my father was born here, but I grew up in Belfast. When I was a child, all the activities, or nearly all of them in Portaferry and Strangford, were focused on the water. Now, or at least in recent years, there are loads of people who live here who, apart from going in the ferry, have never actually been out on the water. So it's as Bob said, if you know about it, you're going to start caring about it, and you take it on from there. Now, where are we? How do we do this? Well, we hold events, a variety of types of events. Talks we have throughout the winter, a guided boat tour or two in the summer, a seashore forage, film nights. We have an annual summer exhibition that changes each year, and we get between 1,000 and 2,000 people coming through. On any given day, there may not be a lot, but you know, that's 1,000 or 2,000 people who won't have seen this stuff before. We were very fortunate to be given the archive of a gentleman, the late Jim Blaney, who came from Lurgan, worked here for, I think it was 12 or 13 years, and then retired to Lurgan. But during his time here, he developed this phenomenally deep interest in local maritime heritage. And a bit more broadly, he ended up being welcome on any lightship round Ireland because he listened to people. So we have this archive which came to us in about 200 boxes, ranging from large boxes down to small A4 box files. And we're cataloguing it, and our aim is to make it available to people. We also produce publications, the most frequent of which are a series of leaflets under the heading of a wee bit of maritime history. And I'll come back to that. But in addition to that, we've had occasional publications. So the talks, for instance, this is about 12 months worth, Tides of Energy by Corwin Frost, talking about work that he was doing or that was being done at the Queen's Marine Lab. Then we went on to Donaghadee and the Princess Victoria. So we're still talking about history, certainly. And then Bob took us on a grand tour of Antarctica. I'm sure you're all jealous after you heard him give this talk today. Alison Murphy and I, both of us founder members of PAST, gave a talk, Tragic Tales Off Our Shores. That was about selected local shipwrecks. Then there's marine and coastal engineering back at the Marine Lab again. Northern Ireland's Hidden Depths, Christine Morrow, who you're going to be hearing from later. Fascinating talk, that. And the working history and restoration of the AK Island, Auxiliary Ketch Island, which, as I understand it, spent most of its working life in the Falkland Islands and has been restored and is now Ireland's only sail training vessel. So you can see there's a wide range of things that we cover. Guided boat tour on the St. Brendan. And that's an on-tap market. Every time you have one of those, they're sold out. You know, you don't know, you're sort of a bit anxious beforehand, are we going to fill the boat? But there's no problem, we're having to turn people away. Seashore forage, the same applies to that. Darrell Burkett and David Thompson, there's David in the green jacket. You can probably tell by his posture that he's an enthusiastic chap. And he has us eating all sorts. He got somebody eating a limpet that he just knocked off a rock. I mean, they're sold out. This is the Rope Walk Maritime Visitor Centre. For those of you that know Explorers, you go in past that, and it's about 2/3 of the way along on the right, and that's where we have our annual exhibition. There's Jim Blaney aboard a Portaferry fishing boat, and that's the plaque we have up in our exhibition centre to mark the availability of the archive. I think if I press next, yes, this is the archive. So look at this here. The boxes on the right have lots of papers. There are magazines. There are about 950 published books, all on a maritime, or nearly all on a maritime theme. And here are more of the papers. So you can appreciate it. The cataloguing of this will go on long after we're in Davy Jones's locker. The leaflets, there's a selection of the leaflets. There are actually 40 of them in total so far. We're producing more all the time. The first one's there, Hutton, that's the Hutton Ferry disaster of 1913, the wreck in Ballyhenry Bay, Portaferry's Titanic links, the lighting of Rock Angus, the lighthouse at the mouth of the Lough. The last few, emigration and the food at sea, maritime snippets from the Jim Blaney collection, Squiggle and Squashy, the bottlenose dolphins. You'll be aware of the dolphins here. So there's a leaflet about them. And Maritime Communication, Part 1. So those have actually been very successful. These are the publications, one on the history of the ferry and another on the stranding of the SS Georgetown Victory in 1946. Just out the loch, turn right a few hundred yards, that's where it went aground, and nobody knows why. It was a calm night, there was not much wind. It was going at full speed up the Irish Sea, having come from Australia and heading for the Clyde, and for some reason or other it went aground. The inquiry can still not be obtained. So we give talks to other organisations, and one of our projects was researching the loss of a small boat that went out from Mount Stewart further up the loch in 1895, and the boat and all 8 of its occupants were lost. And there were many outputs from that. There were articles, there was an exhibition at Mount Stewart, and there was this 3-episode BBC Sounds podcast, which is still available should you wish to listen to it. So what are the good things? The events, the exhibition and the leaflets all have a lot to recommend them. They do well. They could be improved. Not so good is we've had all these talks, over 10, 11 or 12 years of talks, and none of them have been recorded. We did try and get a system for doing that, but there's so much really phenomenal information. It's a terrible shame that all that's gone. Probably the most significant thing is the committee and most of the members are retirees. We don't have a wide age group, and that's something that needs rectified. The problem is only a few people are doing the work. There's only so many hours in the week. So developing in a way that we can encourage younger people, who are working and who have families, children and so on, getting them involved would make an enormous difference. We do have a Facebook page. It's updated from time to time. We don't use any other social media. And clearly that's a way of dealing with the problem I've listed just before it. And that's something that should be done. What's the potential? Well, engaging with the schools, more on the water events. The more I've thought about this over the years, the more it is clear that you can't have history in isolation or ecology. You need to get people onto the water and experiencing it. Involvement of more young people on the committee and as members, strengthening links with the Queen's Marine Lab, and indeed maybe establishing them with the Scottish Association for Marine Science at Oban, the National Oceanographic Centre, the Marine Institute in the west of Ireland. Establishing those links, understanding more about oceanography would be very good. We've long considered the possibility of a well-funded maritime heritage centre, but it has to be sustainable. It has to be run. There have to be people employed in it so that it keeps going. But it also needs to be well-funded, and it needs to be part of a whole wider linkage whereby organisations like ours are linked to others and to academic institutions and so on. So, thank you very much.
Next up we have Rory.
Hi folks, I'm Rory from Strangford Lough Activity Centre. I'm not a marine scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but I have spent most of my time on the loch of the 48 years I've been alive. So we're on the water pretty much every day, sometimes up to 3 times a day. We class ourselves as a quirky experiential activity centre, so we do things maybe slightly a bit differently to normal activity centres, and we try to help explore places off the beaten track. So obviously a lot of you know a lot about Strangford Lough already, but it's got some fantastic assets that we try and link the public with that come out on our tours. So from the wildlife to being the largest sea inlet in the British Isles, the Drumlin Islands, how they were formed, the lightships, where they came from, the Anglo-Norman castles, and the monastic sites and all the history around that. So from the smugglers of Strangford Lough to the Christian heritage to the Vikings. We do have a focus on sustainability, so we do various different experiences around that as well, and I'll come on to that a bit later. But I suppose more than anything, we try and partner with knowledge providers to develop these unique experiences. So the likes of Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful, Northern Ireland Science Fest, Strangford Lough and Lecale partnership, who can provide information and knowledge that we don't have. And David Thompson, who you mentioned earlier, James, does a bit of foraging for us as well. So I'll run you through some of the experiences that we offer. So we're based in Clinchy. It's about 20 minutes from Belfast, not too far from here. I should have come by boat today, seeing the weather, but yeah, I made the long trip round the peninsula, which is a lovely drive as well. So we offer boat trips to the Lough, rib rides, eco tours, full moon trips, and we even do an experience called High Tea at Sea, where they get to enjoy a high tea platter while they're out on the boat. This takes you the whole length of the Lough, right down to the whirlpools, and explores all the islands, castles, rocks and wrecks, and obviously the infamous squiggles and squashy that have provided great entertainment for our customers. We have 10 e-bikes, so we do electric bike tours. This is our electric picnic experience, where we do tours around the Nendrum monastic site, and they have an artisan picnic on the shores there at Nendrum. All our guides are local tour guides, so they're from Clinchy, White Rock area, so we employ everybody locally as well. We do foraging afloat. There's David on the right. So we paddle to an island, and Celia, David's wife, gives a cookery demonstration on the shores of all the forage goods that we find, and we cook it up and eat it. So yes, we've had limpets before as well. We do stand-up paddleboarding and sunrise yoga. You don't want to see me trying to do yoga. It's very entertaining, but it keeps me limber enough to keep going for the rest of the season. So we have a local instructor that comes in to do the yoga side of things, and we take them past a local seal colony, obviously keeping our distance, but it's great to link people with the local wildlife as well. They have breakfast, and then they paddle back as the sun rises. We do paddle with a purpose, so this is our environmental sort of leave no trace corporate social responsibility experience. The top group there on the left came from the States. They were over for a field hockey tournament, and they came over and wanted to offset their mileage somehow and do some activities, so they carried out a litter pick on the shore. We run through the ethics of leave no trace, talk about plastic pollution, give them a bit of a treat with hot chocolate and s'mores before they head off, and we partner with Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful and Strangford Lough and Lecale partnership provide all the equipment for us to do the litter picks, which is great. We do sunset paddle and barbecue, so you paddle out, watch the sailing, have a barbecue on the island, and then paddle back at sunset. And we do a similar one, a full moon paddle, where we have I forgot the word, but we have a specialist in all that knowledge, should I say, that talks about all the astrophysics type stuff. Paddle back in time then, it's a kayaking tour. We have a place names expert and a Viking expert to come in for this one, and they talk through how the Vikings lived and worked the area whenever they were here in between the 7th and 11th centuries. And that takes you up to Nendrum monastic site as well. This is more of our sort of adrenaline activities. This is e-foiling. It's an electric-powered surfboard that can do up to 40 kilometres per hour. Very few people would get up that fast, I must admit. There's no noise or wake for it, no pollution, and we can take up to 8 people on these electric surfboards. That is me on the top right. Top left of me, yeah. Yeah, that's one of our more exciting activities on the Lough. And we do lots of birthday parties and hen and stag groups, corporate team building and skills courses. We do some overnight bushcraft and survival skills courses and go out to Salt Island Bothy for that sort of thing. And recently we've developed axe throwing, so that's the new activity to link with the Vikings in the Lough as well. And that's pretty much me. That's what we do. We try and link people with the local environment. I grew up on the Lough. I've been on the Lough pretty much every day. There was a competition in our family as to who could be the first person on the Lough. I was on it from I was 8 weeks old, but my dad put me to it. My son was born quite premature at 32 weeks, so he was on the water 8 weeks before he was due to be born. So that's us, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Rory. And last but not least, Duane.
Thanks, Moira. So I'm Duane Fitzsimmons, and I run a business called Legends of Lecale Peninsula. And I started 10 years ago, and that might say to you that I learned everything I need to know about the world 10 years ago and started telling people all about it. No, every day is a school day, and I enjoy looking into our local heritage in a lot of depth. So it's something that James pointed out earlier, that heritage is something that's not really out there on social media, but I've kind of turned that on its head. I do lots of different, people call them podcasts, or nowhere near podcasts, because if I was to sit down and do a podcast, I would need to research for about 3 months after learning so much. So I do like short 2 to 3 minute videos on our local heritage. And I'm going to correct you, Rory, because they're not Anglo-Normans, they were Normans. It's something I learned myself, so I always refer to myself, and my surname will give it away straight away. Fitzsimmons is a Norman surname. The Fitz part normally implies there's some level of illegitimacy in it. And whether they were one of the savages or not, I'm not too sure. But the idea that we came here with a Norman knight by the name of John de Courcy is something that's been ingrained into me from a very young age. And I've always been very proud of that heritage. But when I started doing these podcasts, or not podcasts, TikToks on it, I was getting a lot of flack because it was seen that we were invaders, we came and we killed a lot of people. And that's true. But over the last number of months, from January, I've been doing a deeper dive into the history of this particular area. And if you go right back to the Ulster cycle of mythology, you've got Conor MacNessa there, you've got Cuchulainn, but in Downpatrick you had another character called Celter. So Downpatrick's original and oldest name would be Rath Celter or Oras Celter, and that was where Celter lived. And essentially, in the 1st century, the Ulla, who were the descendants of the kings of Ulster, were such a threat to power within Ireland that a new high king called Conor Mór sent a king from Connaught to be the new king, and he was Ogamon. He was the first of the Dal Feta. And the Dal Feta would rule the Ulla for 3/4 of the next 1,000 years. And they were really powerful people. Like in the 4th century, they fell. They were kind of pushed out of Omagh, and they came further east here to settle at Downpatrick. And what I learned was brand new to me. I didn't know that they were pushed out of Omagh, and the Kingdom of Oriel was founded from that. But they were still very powerful. They were, like, if they weren't high kings, they were second in command to the high kings. So they were very influential. And that's why you get characters like St. Patrick sailing in through the narrows of Strangford Lough and landing and becoming the first person to Christianize these people. They were trendsetters. Everyone followed them in the pursuit of Christianity as well. And a lot of people hate St. Patrick too, I've learned from TikTok. I don't know why. But I've kind of pushed back on that, saying that these people were trendsetters. They were the people that everyone else in Ireland was following. So it was fashionable, that's all it was. And by the time that the Vikings arrive, Downpatrick was plundered, and they sailed further up to Grey Abbey and to Movilla. And they did destroy and wreck things on the first encounter, but by the time they were coming back down the loch, the Dalfeta got on their ships and drove them off to sea and fought a massive battle that kind of scared them off a little bit. So because of that, St. Bridget and St. Columba's remains were taken from where they were in Kildare and Iona and brought here to Ulster and buried in Downpatrick. Now, that's all very nice, but then the Dalfeta did something very silly. They ambushed a king of Norway called Magnus Barefoot in Downpatrick in 1103. And the king of Norway at that time had made many allies within Ireland. And he had essentially made so many allies, but he was also king of the Isles. And that meant that he had connections to the Isle of Man also. So when he was ambushed and killed in Downpatrick, about 50 years after this, Norman knight by the name of John de Courcy starts to grow up in England, and he somehow meets the king of the Isle of Man, is Godfrey Olafson. And Godfrey promises if you look into the time frame, Godfrey seems to promise or offer his daughter Africa as a wife to John if John comes to Ulster and gets rid of the Dalfeta. So John marches north in January of 1177 and fights such a huge battle in February that gives him this kingdom and territory of the Eliott. So I therefore see John de Courcy as the last kind of legitimate king of the last king of Ulster. He started to mint his own coins, which was paramount to treason, which is why he had his big, massive downfall. But what's interesting is that John had 22 good friends, and they convinced an army of 300 to come north with him, and my family were part of that. But even after John de Courcy's left, there's this kind of real melting pot of culture in this area. And in the 1600s, after the 9 Years' War and after the flight of the Earls, there's a satirist called Angus O'Daly, and he writes a series of satires which are there to disgrace the Irish who remain on their estates long after the flight of the Earls. And it's basically a means to try and embarrass them. So Angus was actually employed as a bard, and because the Irish court had fallen, he was out of work and he had to find some work for him. And this is in the Ordnance Survey letters, and it refers to two locations. So one of them, the first one is Portaferry, and the second one is Dundrum. So it's quite an insulting thing, but it kind of comes back to something that's been mentioned twice here. So Ard Ulla gan Gorta, Cheer gan Evnish gan Afrin, Vic and Savashi and Crocra Gal for Karskart Barney Leherking. And that translates as, in the Ards of Ulster, destitute and starving. A land without happiness and without a priest to say mass. The grandson of the son of Savage, the foreign hangman, is a man butchering barnacles or limpets with a mallet. And what that's saying is that the grandson of the son of Savage, the least of all these great men, and it also goes back to point out that they are foreigners, they are Normans, as an insult to them, but he's no means of making a living for himself other than smashing limpets off the rocks. And the next verse goes on, Ni fada go triolum tar trai, don etch in a fechar fin, Jeer na nog na grave a reeve, gan me and Dara na road reich. And this is crossing over, not long now till I march across the Strand, and the Strand is Dundrum Inner Bay, to the eminence of wine. And this is an insult to our very early Irish folklore. So in Dundrum Castle, you'll see a kind of modular building there with interpretation, and it refers to a great feast with a guy called Breaku. And Breaku had a really fascinating kind of cauldron of wine that became famous. So that second line is to the eminence of wine, so it's referring to that. But then it goes on to describe the people as from there as Jeer na nog na grave a ri, gan me and Dara na road reich, to visit the youth that never were without desire to watch the king's road. So they're pickpockets. And essentially, by the time of this being written, the earldom of Ulster has completely fallen by the wayside. And by that time, the Dundrum Castle would have been in the hands of the McGuinness. So it's again going back to that idea of insulting these people. But what's interesting about the McGuinness and the McCartans is that they were of the Ulla, so they were the original kings of Ulla before the Dalfata came in. And they essentially went over towards Ive, that kind of area, and they remained there. So after the fall of the Earldom of Ulster, this ancient power came back into power. So you get the McCartans kind of have a resurgence in the early 1400s as well around these parts. So as I said at the start, you might think that I knew everything 10 years ago and started talking about it. No, I've learned an awful lot about it. And I live in a house where I'm the 7th generation to live in that, and that means that I'm very much in contact with my ancestors every day because I live in their house. But I love to bring history a bit more to life to people, and over the last number of months I've been doing a lot more work with schools, and I never forget, I'm here because of a message on TikTok from Heidi, but I had another message, and it was from the teacher here in Portaferry, and I remember coming across on the ferry and I seen this army of about 4 foot high people getting marched down to meet me at the shore so I could talk to them about their Viking heritage and then go on to explain the kind of Norman heritages in the area from there. So I do walks and tours as well, and it's something that I enjoy bringing people to. So I've done it for international audiences as well as very local ones. But every day is a school day, and I always enjoy learning more and more about myself.
Thank you, Duane. I think you'll agree we've got a colourful set of panels here today. So we're going to ask a few questions to each of them, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions to the audience as well as the panel after this. Okay, so Duane, you're first. What role did the sea play in shaping the community identity here historically?
So, as an island, the only way to get here as a population was by boat in the first instance. But that idea of coming by boat obviously is how St. Patrick got here, which informed how Christianity came into Ireland. The Normans as well were descendants of the Vikings. So whenever you think of Normans, you don't often think of them as, you think of them in larger ships, but they hadn't involved kind of more, the shipbuilding hadn't evolved more from the Viking longships that would have been familiar enough around these parts. But the marine identity is part and parcel of our defences. It's why we have the rings of castles around these parts too. But it's also the means to make your living and your way in life as well. So it's a very important and key part of it.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. Next question then to James. How important are community institutions like the Maritime Museum and historical societies in keeping these stories alive?
I think they're very important. I was listening to a podcast yesterday that said that if you include its continental shelf, Ireland is about the 3rd largest country in Europe. So that's one thing worth knowing. The other thing I read one time was that the ratio of coastline to surface area in Ireland is one of the highest in the world. So I think those two things and everything that people have been saying show that the Maritime really has influenced our past profoundly. And I think it is our job to draw people's attention to it, not just in the past, but the present. There are still lots of people who live within sight of the water who don't know much about it, as has already been said. So it's a major task, and we need to get going on it.
Great, thank you. Well, I've just taken a few notes about preserve the memory, give voices to the local, educate the public, strengthen identity, bridge generations, and support research, along with all of that. Okay, up next, Rory. Question for you. You have traditional maritime livelihoods changed over the years, and what's been lost or gained?
I should have looked at these questions before I sat down. I suppose the kelp fishing industry seems to have largely gone. I know there's efforts from talking to a few people in the room earlier of farming kelp now for various scientific reasons and other uses. So I've already learnt something today. A lot of the fishing industry in the Lough has been curtailed, obviously for good reason too. And then the traditional shipbuilding side of things has probably dried up a bit. There's a traditional boatyard quite close to us where we're based in White Rock, and they're still keeping it alive, but the owner is now 70 years old and trying to think of retiring, so looking for somebody that's interested in taking on all that laborious work for little pay, I think would be a tricky industry to get into now. New industries that have come in, obviously the activity, leisure, hospitality side of things, which we're obviously riding that wave, excuse the pun. So that would probably be the biggest one that we're aware of in the area, you know.
Yeah, there's no shift in jobs, environmental pressures as well about fishing and restrictions on that, community change as well. So yes, super, thank you very much, Rory. And to Isabel, a question to you is, leisure sailing or rowing on the Strangford Lough is often seen as recreation, but what are the deeper roles it plays in community life?
Well, I think as I... Sorry. I think as I mentioned, rowing has introduced a lot of people whose initial reaction was, oh, I can't swim. And our reaction is, you know, we're not planning to swim, we're rowing. And we don't lose people out of the boat. But the advantage of getting out on the water, experiencing the wildlife, the number of people who have learnt the names of birds and information about them, the number of people who have been introduced to the mysteries of the tides and weather and a variety of things like that, as well as getting fit, as well as meeting lots of people that they wouldn't have otherwise met, because it's not, when I say it's not community-based, I don't mean that it isn't based within a community, but it's not a case of it's just Strangford coastal rowing, so it's only Strangford people in it. We've got members from Balnahinch, we've got members from Belfast, we've got members from a whole range of places. So it becomes its own community, as well as being based in a town. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and you think there's a strong link to intergenerational?
Very much so.
Mental well-being and an inclusive social space?
Very much so. We have a strong, all of the clubs have a strong junior section from 11 or 12-year-old upwards, and Strangford's juniors, Strangford Coastal Rowing Club's juniors have been very prominent in the medals winning, and now Dundrum seems to be temporarily taking over. But it has put Dundrum and Strangford Lough on the map in terms of being prominent in rowing circles. In fact, it brings some of the main protagonists across from Scotland just to be able to try and beat Dundrum, who are current world champions. So there's an incentive there.
Thank you very much. Okay, with a few questions going out now to either the panel to answer or your good self, the audience, to answer. So, how has life on the Lough shaped your understanding of the sea, and not just as a resource, but as a cultural and emotional space? Does anybody on the panel or the audience like to answer that? I'll read that back again. So it's how life on the Lough has shaped your understanding on the sea, and not just as a resource, but as a cultural and emotional space. Rory, thank you.
I suppose growing up on the Lough, I would have raced boats from quite a young age, and all I was interested in was winning and competing at every given opportunity. Setting up the business then has made me realise the abundance of wildlife on the shore. Everybody that comes out brings something to the experience, you know. So just by talking to people, you're getting information from people that have an interest in ornithology or marine biologists who are just coming out for a paddle, and you're able to learn something from each of them, and how the Lough was formed. The research that we've done and following the likes of Duane on social media and partnering with the different organisations has given us a lot of information that we can pass on then to our clients.
Fantastic. Just a few pointers that I've put down, if anybody wants to elaborate on them. It's a good resource for a relationship. It's emotional anchor, which brings kind of calm and reflection and sense of belonging. Respect for the nature. The daily exposure builds humility towards its power. Memory and identity. It's tied to our family, stories, traditions, and personal milestones. A shared experience creates quite a bond with others who spend time in the water. There's cultural landscape. The Lough becomes part of how you see home, not just the scenery. And rhythm of life. The tides, the seasons shape how time and routines are understood. So all of those. Does anybody else like to add anything to that question? Emma? A wee microphone.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of speak from the concept of being a bit of a blow-in, I suppose, to the area, even though I've been here now for about 22 years. I came from Glasgow, so I grew up in a big city, and always I felt like I was kind of close to the ocean because I studied marine biology, and but it wasn't until I came over and actually started working, and actually myself and Rory worked in the aquarium, but at the same time, and you sort of walked in to realise that you can't tell what fish this is or what this is after 3 years of being at university, and you feel like you didn't actually really know anything about the ocean at all. And I think coming to live here, I feel much more connected now, I think, actually spending my days obviously looking out at Strangford Lough, but also, learning a lot about the different users here. I think coming from a research background, and so many people see the Lough so positively, but I think we all have our own little niche areas. So, you come in and you sort of see this beautiful marine resource, and then obviously working in research, you have those kind of conflicts with people who are using this for their living, and making sure that you're kind of trying to make sure everyone's happy and that everyone's sort of finding their niche and being able to use the Lough in the way that they need to, but also obviously preserving the biodiversity that we have here too. But yeah, I think living here it really heightens your connection. So I'm kind of, I suppose, interested if what Isabel said about people coming from all different areas. I suppose, like Moira and Rory, you experienced that too with things like the festivals and like your clients. But do you find people are coming from further afield, or is it a lot of local people that we're kind of getting into these experiences where they're enjoying the Lough?
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you. Okay, question 2. What makes this area, Portaferry and Strangford, unique in terms of its relationship with the sea? Yeah, Duane, thank you.
Is it? Yeah, it's been mentioned already. There's a thing going across the Lough there every 15 minutes or so. And a lot of people tend to overlook it as a big problem here in Portaferry because it means that you're technically very isolated. But But even like over there is another peninsula, it's Lecale. So we're very much at the edge of everything, but we have a really fantastic piece of maritime heritage that's very much undervalued by people who live here because they see it as a problem. But it's right here on our doorsteps. And when people come here from even just up from Dublin for the day or from Belfast, they're totally fascinated and blown away by this place because it feels like it could be somewhere else. So it's not in Strangford and Portaferry, but at the weekend there I had a group up from the Ring of Gullion, and they were walking the Sheepland coast with me, and we had a really lovely day. It's where I got my suntan from. But we were like just out by Lake Nebo, and there's really fantastic kind of 20-metre high cliff top kind of rocky ledge there. And they were just like blown away by it. They said it could have been in the Caribbean because the water was just so clean and clear. So we've very much got a really interesting geology, but also that cultural layer weaved in over the top of it too.
Thank you very much, Duane. And we notes that I've jotted down as well, if anybody wants to elaborate on it, is about tidal drama. The fast-moving narrows create a constant visible connection between people and the sea. The ferry lifeline, which Duane said, it's part of our daily life every day. It's strange when you don't see the ferry crossing, when it's off so many times. The rich ecosystems that we have here, and the most important is obviously our maritime habitats, shaping local awareness, and combating coastal identity. Villages closely tied to the shoreline, the sea always in view and in mind, and of course blending work and leisure together. There's great strong community connections, which is through the regattas, clubs, sailing events, festivals, and all of that. And there's a sense of isolation as well as connection. So physically small area, but we're deeply connected through the water. And educational presence, which is through Queen's, the marine research, and learning embedded local life. And obviously, the most important one is a deep-rooted pride for us. Identity, strongly shaped by the Lough and its long maritime history. Next question is, what challenges does Strangford face today, and how can community-led initiatives help? So that's what challenges do the Strangford Lough face today, and how can community-led initiatives help? Isabel?
I think there's a massive challenge in terms of tourism. Tourism's great if you've got the infrastructure that can cope with it. And you've only got to try and get down into Strangford Village on a sunny weekend to find that it's gridlocked. Now, that means that lots of people are coming into the village, lots of people are trying to get on the ferry, but the people who are getting on the ferry are just focused on getting on the ferry. They're not coming to Strangford, they're coming to the ferry as a tour. And so they're not spending money in Strangford. So the businesses in Strangford aren't getting the benefit. And it works in both directions. So all the way around the Lough, there's restricted access. There's very little car parking available. It's also really quite difficult to get down to the Lough, to get down to the shore in lots of places. So from that point of view, I think there's a lot of development, and I mean that in the most sensitive way. There's a lot of development needed to provide for the tourists who are largely the bread and butter of the area.
Yes, thank you. And I suppose we have somebody from the audience who would like to add to that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, not to be doom and gloom, there's a lot of issues we could address in Strangford Lough. I think it's a really good example of intersectional problems. So tourism's a good example. We want to try and balance tourism and accessibility with the class biodiversity that we get here. I think it's now, over 2,700 species on record. I think higher than that now. And community stuff is often overlooked. Like, communities are the most engaged half the time. And we've been doing some work with a few different folks to try and get out there and do stuff. I think small changes incrementally that are sustained rather than just dropped is a big problem. So yeah, just to add on to what is being said and say, there's plenty of problems, but there's plenty of people who want to solve those problems, and it's just getting support to the people who need it. So yeah, so just an open conversation potentially to have with a whole bunch of folks.
Can I add another point?
Thank you.
Right.
And
So I was just going to add another point. There's a forgotten part of Strangford Lough, and when I was doing the piece for Countryfile, it was a piece that I originally pitched to them. So the area around Downpatrick used to be a coastal town, and that whole area was reclaimed in 1745. And in 1957, they came up with I term it the final solution to be grim about it, the coil barrier. And in November 2023, there was really severe flooding in Downpatrick that still has impacts right to this very day in Downpatrick, because the main thoroughfare in the town was built across the former seafloor. And there's no one actually dealing with the solution to that. It's a very small part of the main branch into the town, but there's a whole landscape there that's been lost in terms of its cultural importance, but also it's a major threat because we are in increasing adverse weather events in terms of storms and wet weather events, and the barrier that's there at the coil hasn't the capacity to get rid of the water that it needs to get rid of because it works on a tidal system. It doesn't have the means to pump the water out quickly enough, but there's also other issues like sewage and things like that in the coil, and it's often forgotten about that part of Strangford Lough.
yes, thank you. And just a wee bit to add to that is about local people who contribute by doing beach cleans, habitat restoration and citizen science projects. So they're all community-led projects happening in the community. And the last question, what does being on the loch mean to you personally, and why does it matter for this community? So why does being on the loch mean, what does being on the loch mean to you personally, and why does it matter for this community? Alison.
I think one thing we've omitted, this might sound soppy, but it's the effect the Strangford Lough has on your soul. I think it's the calming influence. I think it makes people hear different. I think that Anthony Buckley did a study and called this area the gentle people. But also I think it has influenced so much more, and we haven't touched on it, probably because we're scientific here. But, you know, I was first introduced to Strangford Lough in the opening pages of a book by Joseph Tumblety called Red as the Portlight. And I grew up in Belfast and knew nothing about this loch. And as I got older and enjoyed the loch, I saw the effect it had on his soul and his writing and what he created. So I think it is meaningful for the people in this area, and I think maybe it's something we should be developing, in fact, in terms of rest, relaxation. It's not just, it's actually being here and existing here that could be good for people as a source of, I don't know, relaxation.
Yes, yep, that's 100%. There is that whole social connection, well-being, cultural community and economic support. We have a shared identity, and it's really basically feeling the personal connection, calm, freedom and escape of daily pressures. And I suppose for me, on the back of all of that is when we're talking about tourism and talking about the impact of people coming to the area and the economic benefit of that, but we do run the Sails and Sounds Festival, which does draw in people. We have the Portaferry Gala Festival, and that impacts on obviously people coming in, more cars, more fuel, all of that, people coming in their boats, etc. We do try to, with those festivals, make it more sustainable and more eco-friendly. So just so people know, we are working towards that with our festivals and liaise with all our partnership groups, DFI, PSNI and all of those, and with the Queen's University as well. They link in with us as well. So yes, we have a question from the floor.
Well, no, you give reductions Sorry, can you use the microphone? It
Sorry.
helps.
You could give reductions on the ticket price if people didn't come by their car, you know, and very much like taking the lessons we learned from lockdown period, you know, that we ban a car going, you know, one day in the summer or, you know, once a month and force people onto the buses. You
We
know what I'm saying?
try to introduce a park and ride idea to keep cars not come down and get the bus down, etc. But, you know, and even the use that the DFI used to, and the float night of the gala, not charge any money to encourage, and it was foot passengers only. So, but they don't do that anymore. As Alison knows, they charge every penny for people going across, whether it's festivals or not. But yes, we do encourage that through the festivals to do a park and ride. If Ulster Bus wasn't as expensive to book the buses, but we are doing our best to try to reduce that. The park and ride or car share to reduce the impact. Oh, sorry, we'll have somebody from the floor.
Melanie Mulligan here from Armagh. So I came in a wee bit late and the first speaker was talking about those from Armagh and the middle of Ireland. And I can relate, although I don't live anywhere near a lough, I can totally, well I do, but in terms of in comparison to you guys, I can totally relate to the emotional benefits of the ocean. But I'm here, I suppose, in my work hat in education and thinking about ocean literacy in its broadest sense. And so I'm thinking about all young people across Northern Ireland who maybe don't have the privilege, luxury, or even the capability of visiting such places. And the first speaker, you were saying about how important this is for, you know, you can't care about something that you don't know about. And I'm trying to think about how can I bring ocean literacy to young people who maybe don't have access to the ocean. And I wondered if anybody had any...
Yep.
Oh, lots of... Brilliant.
Hello, I'll go for that one. So I'm Christine Morrow and I'm based at the Marine Lab in Portaferry. You'll hear a bit more about our project in the afternoon, but we have an online portal, a website with lots of videos from sites all around Northern Ireland. It's really visual and it goes back, it's got imagery going back to the 70s and the 80s right up till today. So it's very interactive. So is that live? It is live, and Libby's going to be demonstrating it. So. Okay. Every day
Great, that's fantastic. It's good to hear.
Is this okay? Is it on now? To add to that, there's loads of resources out there. It's just knowing who to chat to. Yes, there's the Marine Biodiversity Data Portal. There's a lot of organisations that create stuff for in-school teaching, so games, things you can do, crafts and stuff that relate to ocean literacy. Ourselves, we have some of that, but I know that other folks in the network do as well. So there is lots of stuff out there. Just have a word with people. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Add to that?
Is that everybody? That's all the questions. Yep.
I'm just going to add to that last bit about education. There are definitely lots of resources, but from my experience, it's the teachers finding time to fit it into what they are committed to teach, and some of them can make space for that and some of them can't. So if you can make, you know, the organisations in here that offer that, you know, you really have to do the reaching out to the schools that aren't right on the coastline, and also if you can find funds to be able to bring people to the beach as well. That was one of the biggest things that we could do, is actually pay for the bus rides to bring the kids to the beach, and for some of them it was their first time out there.
Can I just say locally, I've been working with the integrated school.
Oh, sorry.
There are some I don't know how long this is making me speak. Is this okay? There's no feedback or anything. But there are some members of the IOLN who are based in the north, and they do school visits, and they take the schools to the shore, beach schools, Northern Ireland. Should that about She was at the event in Belfast last year, really, really good. I need to say something in respect to, I actually live in Donegal, and I have 2 hats. I work for the IOLN, but I also co-founded an organisation up there called the Sea Collective, and my husband and I visit schools and take schools to the shore, and that is funded by the government through the Heritage Council. But funny, it's not just about the biodiversity, we're also able to talk about the culture and history of that particular area, and this is all funded through the Heritage Council. So maybe there'll be something, or it'll be worthwhile talking to policymakers in the north to set up an organisation like that, that will be able to go into schools, provide experts to go into schools. Not that I'm saying I'm an expert, not at all, but like, not just marine biologists, historians, people like in boat building, you were saying about somebody who's, yeah, and take schools to learn about all these different aspects of the culture and the heritage, as well as the marine biodiversity, and that, to go to schools and take the schools to the seashore. One of the best things I do is taking children down to the rocky shore, the sandy shore, and getting them to explore this for themselves. Inspiring curiosity as well as just teaching them facts. So I hope it's okay to say that. So I just wanted to put on a bit. Yeah.
Just the last thing I wanted to say was that locally Portaferry has, both schools have been this year linking in with RNLI, the Coast Guard, Ulster Scots, and with the Selkies Sea Shanty group. So they're exploring, touching on that. The school actually has it part of their curriculum this year to explore the water and the dangers of the water and what's in the water, etc. So there is touching on it. It's not a big lot, but it's touching on it in both of the schools. Could you speak?
I am thinking about more the children who don't have the opportunities for that. But that's not, I'm not saying it's a barrier, but it's one that can be overcome. And I'm even hearing about those histories, the long list of shipwrecks and mysteries of, I've taken notes, but if whoever the guy was that was talking about, come and give me your contact details so I can maybe have access to some of these. You know, I can just imagine the excitement and curiosity that those stories, even in a classroom, could instill. So yeah, it's just finding where the information is. But yeah, there's nothing like actually being in the place, for sure.
I have a selection of the leaflets with me today, so you're welcome to some. Yes, they are on our website, Portaferry and Strangford Trust. There's a download section and they're all there.
Okay, one last question and then we're going to wrap up. Do you want to pass that?
Thank you. It's not a question, it's just maybe to answer yours as well. Erasmus Plus funding, which Northern Ireland and Ireland can take part in from next year, it allows schools to partner across the island but across Europe, and it could be on a ocean project, and there's funding for that, and that could involve visits and mobility for students as well as teachers. So Erasmus Plus, we haven't been able to access that in Northern Ireland since Brexit, but now from 2027 we'll be able to do that again. So it could well be, schools across the island could be partnering on a project and getting funding from the EU for that. So it's a good opportunity to look at that too.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for our speakers and our moderator, Moira? I think that was a very interesting conversation because all of our speakers talked about people experiencing the sea and learning about the sea and its history and its culture from actually being on it, whether you're on a paddleboard, a rowing boat, going foraging on the sea, taking tours. But perhaps there's some tension there. If we have too many people coming to experience that, it's something to manage. And perhaps there's a gap then in who gets to experience that. And we need to do more to reach out to young people who aren't maybe living right on the coast. But thank you so much for those conversations. We're going to have lunch now downstairs. We'll return for panel 2 at past. So we have just over an hour. So please enjoy yourselves, look at all the stands that are downstairs, and even take a little walk along the shore.